Hello there. So the popularity of steel mace is currently growing. You've got the likes of Squat University featuring it on their page and some other bigger names as well. However, some people have been asking about flow, specifically what makes a steel mace flow good. Now, there's no right or wrong answer to what makes a good flow, because it's usually very unique to the individual. I mean, that is kind of the point of flow, is about representing yourself, expressing yourself through the movement of steel mace and the steel bar. Now, for some people though, a bit of a framework can help. Maybe just there's so much variety, there's so much out there that having just a little bit of a guideline, stay within here and here, is good, and some people prefer that, myself included, sort of I want to do this and I want to do that. Now, there's two possible ways I can describe to you what a good flow is. We've got a technically good flow, and we've also got a flow that's good for health and fitness. I'm going to go through the technical side first, and then we'll move on to the flow for fitness. First up, we've got to decide what even is a flow. Now, it's a steel mace exercise movement with a Macebell. It doesn't have to be steel. You can do this with a garter, technically. You can even do it with a sledgehammer, but we're just going to call it steel mace as a bit of an umbrella terminology for it. What's a good flow? What's a bad flow? How do you make one? Now, I have got a video on how to make your own flow, but then you've got to decide, is that flow good enough? Do you continue making it? Do you stop? Do you go and make another flow? That's up to you. So again, what even is a flow? Now, Macebell movements that are a sequence of 3 or more movements. Okay, that could be a squat into a 360 into an uppercut. That's technically a flow for as far as we're concerned. Is it a good flow? Who knows? Technically it can be a very good flow. It can also technically be a very bad flow. And in terms of fitness, again, that could be all you need for your flow. Likewise, it might not be enough. Who knows? We will discuss that in a moment. So today I come to you from my new office. Just trying to get the time in really, so apologies for the absolute mess of the place. It's still a work in progress, trying to get these videos out to you whilst I've just taken on my own gym as well, which is a lot of work, so that's why I'm having to do it here today instead of doing it out in the middle of a field, or likewise, now I'm in the gym a bit more often, there's more people in here, well hey for me, getting a quiet space in order to film stuff is being a bit harder, so we're doing it out of the office today. Let's run through what makes a technically good flow. Now, at the time of recording, I was about to host a Steel Mace Flow competition. Now, unfortunately, it didn't really take off. Over here in the UK anyway, it's maybe a bit early days. Steel Mace swinging competitions, just the traditional swings of 360s, 10 and 2s or 300s. They're only really starting to now come about in a national level for the UK. So perhaps the flow competition was perhaps a bit early. However, what that did make me do was make a rule set, a framework for Steel Mace Flow that we agreed with some other flow artists as well over here in the UK. And we took it on a basis of a bit, almost like figure skating. So we've got different categories and points for scoring in those different categories. And this is what I think will make a technically good flow. Now, of the 10 categories we have, there's 4 worth really talking about. So for example, one category is about groundwork. So you get points for how much groundwork you can do. That doesn't necessarily make a flow good or bad. It just makes it more varied, to be honest. So it's not really one we need to discuss, but there are 4 categories that override everything that can make a flow good, so to speak. Now, one of those is complexity, the other is your fundamentals, you've got your presence and your continuity. All right, so complexity is kind of as it says on the tin, the more complex it is, technically, the better the flow it is. The harder it is, the more skill you need in order to perform that flow. A simple example would be a 360, done with both hands, very standard movement, very basic. You compare that to, say, a inward or outward mill. That's more complex. There's more stability involved, there's more movement involved. Then you try and do that in, say, a figure 4 position, it gets more complex further still. So you could argue more complex movements can make a better flow. It requires more skill from you, more practice from you. It's more likely that you're a seasoned flow artist if you're doing these more complex movements. However, just because a movement is complex isn't always good. If it's sloppy but complex, you could argue it's not very good. So like a squat, for example, there are people that can do a squat and they hunch over. It is a squat by nature. However, is that a good squat? Now, that's the same for steel mace work, having that form fundamentals. So for example, going into an uppercut. So as we uppercut, rather than letting that backhand drop on the uppercut, we're keeping that backhand nice and high, so it's squeezing the shoulder blades together. There's a bit better form there. So you have always got to have good form during all of the movements. They can be sloppy and they can be complex, but that doesn't necessarily make it good. One thing that's depends on what style you want to do is also your continuity, okay? How smoothly does each movement flow into the next? And likewise, when we do structured flow, that's about performing the exercise on one side the same as you do on the other side. So you do 3 or 4 movements on your left hand side with your left hand leading, and then you'll change side and you've got to perform those same movements in the same sequence with the same tempo with your right hand leading. I mean, you can alternate, you can do 1 movement left hand, 1 movement right hand, other movement left hand, other movement right hand, and keep going. Otherwise, you kind of end up in what's called free flow, where you do random sequences of movements. Now, usually, at least from my experience of free flow, is that it's not choreographed. You just do the movement and you feel what's next and you just go. Now, they can be very good flows. You can have excellent form, you can have excellent complexity. Downside is you're limited by what you know at the time. A choreographed flow, you can build, you can grow it, you can adapt it as you see fit, whereas a free flow is pretty hard to repeat most of the time unless you've recorded it and watch it back. Then lastly in our categories, we have the presence, or what I like to call presence. Now, this is kind of, do you look like somebody who's just wanging a bit of steel pole around in a park, or does this look like something that it's meant to be? Now, presence has some very particular styles, okay? And I've touched on this before in the how to make a mace flow video, and I like to call it an Eastern style and a Western style. So effectively, an Eastern style is very fluid, very circular. Movements flow into one another, Steel Mace Flow. Each movement just uninterrupted moves into the next movement. You don't know when one movement starts and the next movement ends. They all just continue to keep going, and it's a very relaxed form of Steel Mace Flow, but it's also a very complex form. Trying to keep the mace moving all the time is very mentally challenging. However, once you get it right, you can just feel the weight of the mace rather than have to fight the weight of the mace. And that comes with experience and comes with practice. So you could argue, again, if it's very, very Eastern style, that could be argued as a good flow because it's come from experience and training. Conversely, on the opposite end of that spectrum, you've got Western style flow, which is very, very forceful. It's what people like to call hitting their landmarks. So when you do an uppercut, you uppercut and stop and force and try and bend the bar and crush the bar, and it's very strong and it's very planted. And it's very much hard work on the muscles as well, trying to constantly keep the tension on the bar. But just because it's the opposite end of the spectrum doesn't mean it's a bad flow. It's actually a very good flow, so to speak, to try and keep that tension, keep that poise, keep that sense of mind whilst you're doing the exercise. It is very difficult. And if you can pull that off, you've done a good flow. You've done a good job at that flow. And that kind of brings us on to the next bit as well, which is more about flow for fitness. Now, flow for fitness is very much based on what you want out of your flow. I personally do Steel Mace Flow for cardiovascular benefits. Now, don't get me wrong, it burns my shoulders at times, it's burning my forearms at times, it's burning my legs at times, but it's not enough to induce a muscular growth, not in a hypertrophy bodybuilding sense. Yes, there will be some muscular development, but the amount of reps we're doing with the weight I'm doing isn't enough to induce that kind of massive growth response. So I mainly do it for my heart and my lungs, to keep moving, to keep mobile, to keep the concentration, to keep the skill, to keep the balance, to practice those things. And if that's what you're looking for, then doing kind of any flow will work. But again, it largely comes down to what you want out of flow. Now, if you want to smash your legs, you want to really work your legs, get them burning, if you do just 360s and upper body movements, it's not a good flow for what you're aiming for. However, if you do a lot of lower body works, a lot of lunges, a lot of squats, a lot of curtsies, whatnot, that is a good flow for what you are aiming for. Sorry, I can't really give you a more defined answer. You know, a lot of people think this is A, B, C is a good flow. Not necessarily. If you're after X, Y, and Z, doing A, B, and C isn't any good. Now, for fitness, we could take a bit of a broader spectrum to this of how much does it cover. Now, being flow is very dynamic, it's very overall. So you could argue that a Steel Mace Flow that is just upper body isn't that good a flow, because all it's doing is your upper body. Likewise, when it's just lower body, isn't that good a flow. There are plenty out there that are just upper and just lower. I would potentially argue a flow that incorporates upper body movements and lower body movements makes a good flow, especially in terms of fitness. You get multiple development points throughout your entire body. And then from a cardiovascular sense, the way it's defined as multiple muscles moving over a repetitive period of time, you're moving lots of muscles repetitively over a period of time, you're ticking that box of cardiovascular development. Now you can marry the two. You can have a technically good flow that's also a good flow for fitness. They can easily marry up. So if you have an increased complexity, usually that means you're doing a lot of movements. So you might be doing a mill whilst in a curtsy squat position. You're not only taking a complexity, because doing a mill in a curtsy squat is more complex than just doing a mill. And likewise, you're using your shoulder, using your scapula, using your lats. But whilst you're doing that from the mill, you're using your glutes, you're using your legs, your core's more tense because you're slightly unstable. More muscles are active. So one does kind of go with the other. The more complex a flow, the better it usually is for fitness. The more presence you have providing it does the whole body, usually the better it does for fitness. And one example of that is, say for example, a lateral lunge. You can just step to one side and do a lateral lunge, or you can do something where you add a bit more presence, a bit more style to it, where we lift the leg up high, we bring the arm up high, and then straighten and pull the arm down in a very more sort of Western style and solid landmark position. And that can make your flow more complex and technically good, technically better, as well as being better but from a fitness sense. When you lift your arm up high, you're getting your deltoids involved more. When we lift the leg up high to take the step, you're bringing your hip flexors involved more than you would have done if just stepping to the side. Likewise, straightening that arm, putting some tension into the bar, starts to activate more muscles and it looks better and feels harder. And that is what I would say people are looking for in what makes a good flow. I can't tell you, do this movement followed by this movement followed by that movement makes a good flow. That's up to you. It's how do you make this and that movement work your complexity and work multiple body parts all at once. And that partly makes a good flow. Now, it'll be interesting to hear what you think is a good flow, because there's plenty of people out there, plenty of styles out there that you could say is a good flow. Going back to Leo Savage himself, he's doing very, very complex movements. He's probably the best flow artist in the game. You know, he largely he birthed the thing anyway. And he's very, very complex. He's very, very good. But is that a good flow for you and me? Maybe not. Maybe it's so difficult and so complex that we can't really match that level. And so we're not really putting all our effort into it. It's too much work. So sometimes going down to a easier flow can be better for you. Some of the simple flows are knackering. They really are. Just some of those flows that are maybe 4 or 5 sequences long, you know, 4 or 5 movements, and then you're back into it. You've got to do those 4 or 5 on the next side. And you just repeat for the same period of time because it's so short and it's very, very demanding, which could be a good flow for fitness if that's the way you want to go. But likewise, the more complex flows, the longer ones, you're going through a lot of sequences, a lot of movements, and you don't really get that mental reset until you get back to the start, and then you can sort of take a breather and go again. So that could also be a good flow. It is a spectrum. There's no one, this is good, that is good. It's somewhere in between, depending on what you want on the day, what you want of that flow. You can go for short, sharp intensity. You can go for long and smooth, perhaps. You know, like a sprinter versus a marathon runner. Both do running, but one style of running isn't good for the other. So it'd be interesting to hear, what do you think makes a good flow? I'd be interested to find out different people's perspectives on this. I mean, this is just my perspective on it. You know, I'm in the UK, which is not huge. Steel Mace Flow isn't huge yet. So what do you think makes a good flow? I'm interested here. Let me know in the comments.